Welcome to Reliable Prepper. If you're here, then you probably know that preparing for survival is about more than just making it through the first 24 or 72 hours. Those early days are critical, sure, but what happens after that? How do you sustain yourself, your family, or even your whole community when days turn into weeks, months, or even longer? That's the big question we're tackling today. How to make resource sharing a long-term survival strategy. It's something that goes way beyond stockpiling and quick fixes. Today we're going to dive deep into resource sharing, looking at why it's not just a powerful tool, but sometimes a necessary approach to survival when you're facing an extended crisis. And this isn't just about sharing supplies, it's about trading skills, knowledge, labor, and even the support you might need to get through some seriously tough times. Stick with me because we're going to get into some real-life examples, practical tips, and even some cautionary tales that could make a difference between just getting by and truly thriving. And hey, if you find this content helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and let's keep building this community together. Let's start with why resource sharing is so powerful in a survival situation. It's not just splitting a bag of rice or trading a few cans of beans. In the right hands, resource sharing builds a sense of community, and that community can become one of the best defenses against the challenges of scarcity, fear, and insecurity that come with long-term survival. So imagine this. You're in an urban area with limited storage space and maybe limited access to big supply chains. Suddenly, the idea of sharing resources becomes a lot more attractive because it means you're gaining access to a whole variety of goods and skills that you alone might not have. In a densely populated area, maybe someone nearby has some medical supplies and another person has a generator, while someone else knows how to can food or make meals stretch longer. Everyone brings something unique to the table. And this pooling of resources, especially in those early weeks when supplies are running low, can really make a difference in how far each person's stockpile goes. Now, if you're in a rural area, the dynamics are different, but the benefits are still huge. Maybe you have neighbors with livestock, others with equipment for large-scale gardening, or even people with skills for hunting and foraging. Sharing here can mean getting access to larger resources, like shared land for growing food or heavy equipment to help repair things around the property. And in these more remote areas, you're often farther from grocery stores or supply chains, so working together with what you have locally is a way to get through those lean times without having to make dangerous trips to town. After Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, entire neighborhoods found themselves isolated and forced to rely on the resources within their own community. People pooled things like generators, shared fresh water from community wells, and helped each other contact loved ones using each other's satellite phones. They showed how powerful resource sharing can be when the alternative is going without entirely. And resources don't just mean physical supplies. Let's talk about skills for a second, because skills in a prolonged survival situation are worth their weight in gold. Think about the knowledge each person brings to the table. In a long-term grid-down scenario, having someone in the group who understands alternative power sources like solar or wind can be a literal lifesaver. Or take a situation where civil unrest makes medical access risky or impossible. Someone with first aid training suddenly becomes incredibly valuable. Even simple things like knowing how to repair clothing, build basic shelter, or cook with limited ingredients can become critical. We saw this after Hurricane Katrina. There were groups with a variety of skills who could recover faster than others. Some people knew carpentry and could rebuild homes, while others knew how to provide basic medical care, and others were able to keep people fed with what little was available. It wasn't just the food or water that kept people going. It was the mix of abilities that allowed them to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Security is another benefit that often gets overlooked. It's hard to maintain security on your own, especially if you're in a high-density area where there might be a lot of people. But a community can pool resources and create a defense strategy together. They can rotate watches, share security tasks, and make sure everyone gets the sleep they need to function without burning out. And if you're in a rural area where neighbors might be a bit more spread out, patrolling large areas can be a full-time job for one person. Sharing that responsibility makes it much more sustainable and much less exhausting. Now, when it comes to morale, sharing isn't just a nice thing to do. It can be a lifeline. It's one thing to have enough to eat, but it's another thing to feel mentally strong enough to keep going, day after day. Being part of a community, even if it's just a small group, provides psychological support, reduces isolation, and gives people something to look forward to. Whether it's sharing a meal or just sitting together and talking, these interactions can make a massive difference. During long power outages, some communities found that getting together, even for a simple gathering, helped everyone stay grounded and hopeful. Just knowing you're not alone can be a powerful motivator to keep pushing forward. And then there's the matter of waste. Sharing resources can help reduce waste, which is critical when supplies are limited. Let's say you're living in an apartment building, and someone has a stash of canned goods that's close to expiring. Instead of letting it go bad, they could share it or trade it with others. In suburban areas, people might share garden produce or split the use of cooking facilities, leading to more efficient use of what's available. This isn't just a nice side benefit, it's a smart way to make sure nothing gets wasted when every resource counts. But resource sharing isn't all positive, and we need to be real about the potential downsides, especially when it comes to survival. There are times when sharing could even jeopardize your well-being or drain your resources faster than you expected. One of the first challenges is resource depletion. When you're sharing with others, things can run out faster than they would if you were just looking out for yourself. If you're in an urban area where people are already in close quarters, this is a major concern. The sheer number of people can quickly turn a large stockpile into a small one if rationing isn't handled carefully. Without a clear system in place, even the best-intentioned community could find itself out of supplies sooner than expected. In a rural setting, while resources might not be immediately depleted because of the lower population, it's still possible to run into shortages if supplies aren't managed carefully. It's a real challenge to balance sharing with conserving, and it requires some discipline and planning to make sure everyone's needs are met without overusing the collective resources. And then there's the risk of dependency. When people start relying on shared resources, they can sometimes lose their sense of individual preparedness. It's easy to get comfortable and start assuming that others will pick up the slack, which can lead to a lack of personal responsibility over time. In a prolonged survival scenario, though, there's no guarantee that a communal setup will last forever. Communities can split, resources can run low, or unforeseen circumstances can cause people to fend for themselves again. When you rely too much on others, you're risking your own preparedness, so it's essential to keep up your own stores and skills even while participating in a group. One of the biggest challenges in any resource-sharing situation is trust and security. In a small town where people might know each other well, trust might come a little easier. But in an urban environment where people might not know each other's backgrounds or true intentions, the stakes are higher. Trust is everything in survival, and unfortunately, desperation can bring out the worst in some people. This is where caution and careful planning are necessary. Whether you're setting boundaries on what gets shared or vetting people before bringing them into the fold, it's important to protect yourself and be smart about who you trust. Conflicts can arise too, especially as resources start to dwindle and tensions build. Even in the best of times, people can clash over priorities, personal boundaries, or the way resources are managed. Now imagine the added stress of a survival situation, where scarcity is affecting everyone. It's easy for disagreements to escalate, and that can threaten the stability of the whole group. To mitigate this, it's crucial to establish some kind of agreement or code of conduct from the start. Having clear roles, open communication, and maybe even a designated leader can help keep the peace and prevent small issues from spiraling into bigger problems. To set up a resource-sharing community that's resilient and effective, you need to start by laying some groundwork. Establishing initial agreements on how resources will be shared, who contributes what, and the rules around distribution can save a lot of trouble down the line. And these agreements aren't one-size-fits-all. They need to fit the unique needs of your group and your environment. In a rural setting, for example, agreements might focus on land use and the sharing of tools or equipment, while in an urban area, the priority could be on security and privacy. People should know upfront what's expected of them, whether it's contributing supplies, providing labor, or taking on certain roles within the group. A simple verbal agreement can work if everyone's on the same page, but in more formal setups, writing things down might be worthwhile, especially when tensions are high. Another essential aspect is organizing inventories and responsibilities. Keeping track of who's contributing what resources are available, and where everything is stored is crucial to making resource sharing work. Imagine you're in an apartment building during a crisis. Maybe you're the one with the extra canned goods, but someone else has medical supplies and another neighbor has tools. By keeping a shared inventory, you all know what's available and can prioritize things as they get used up. In a more rural setup, this might mean tracking larger resources like land, livestock, or tools. A simple shared list can work wonders here, whether it's digital or a physical ledger everyone has access to. And you don't want the responsibility for managing that inventory to fall on one person all the time. Rotating that responsibility can prevent burnout and keep everyone accountable. Now let's talk about rationing and distribution. This can be one of the hardest parts to manage in a shared setting. When you're dealing with finite resources, it's essential to set up a fair distribution system that everyone agrees on. Maybe it's a first-come, first-served system. Or perhaps you prioritize based on need, like making sure families with young kids get food first. Whatever approach you choose, make sure it's clear to everyone and that people are on board, because misunderstandings here can lead to serious conflict. Some groups even use tokens or have a designated person responsible for handing out supplies to avoid any perception of favoritism or unfair treatment. In the heat of survival, perceptions matter, and they can make or break the trust within the group. Let's not forget about the importance of defining roles. In a survival scenario, people often thrive when they have clear roles that match their skills and strengths. One person might be responsible for medical needs, another might focus on gardening or food prep, and someone else could handle security. By assigning roles, you make sure that tasks don't slip through the cracks and everyone feels like they're contributing in a meaningful way. In a suburban area, for example, someone might oversee a community garden or manage solar power setups, while in a small town, a role could involve organizing a barter system. Rotating these roles when possible not only helps build a more versatile group, but also keeps individuals from getting burnt out in their specific duties. All right, let's get into security because it's one of the most important and often overlooked aspects of resource sharing. If you're pooling resources, you're also pooling risk, and that means you have to think carefully about protecting what you have and who you let in. In an urban setting, security is going to look different than in a rural area. With a higher population density, you're more likely to face potential threats from strangers or even from people within the building if things get desperate. You might need to focus on fortifying communal spaces like using reinforced doors or securing windows on lower floors. Some urban groups go as far as establishing quiet hours, blackout protocols, or even using code words for when something's wrong. It's all about controlling the environment so that everyone feels safe without drawing unwanted attention. In rural areas, the security challenges are more about covering large perimeters and staying alert to any movement across big stretches of land. You might not have to deal with as many strangers, but when people do approach, you want to be prepared. Patrolling these areas and setting up small checkpoints or even natural barriers can help make sure you're not caught off guard. And with larger spaces, you have the opportunity to set up early warning systems like bells on wires or simple motion detectors that let you know if someone or something is approaching. No matter where you are, though, vetting new members is absolutely essential. In any survival situation, desperation can bring out the worst in people, and you need to be careful about who you let into your circle. In a small town, maybe you already know most people, but in larger communities or if people are coming from outside the area, you'll want some way to assess their intentions and reliability. Some communities do this through a kind of probation period, where newcomers are asked to help with certain tasks or contribute supplies right off the bat. It's a way to gauge commitment without immediately giving access to all your resources. Another important factor is privacy. Especially in urban environments during times of civil unrest, you don't want everyone knowing the extent of your resources or capabilities. Let's say you have a stash of medical supplies or a good stock of food. You don't want that information becoming common knowledge. The more people know what you have, the higher the risk of theft or conflict. Sometimes it's necessary to keep certain supplies or skills under wraps, not out of selfishness, but for the safety and security of the whole group. Let's get into some best practices because making a resource-sharing community work long-term takes more than just good intentions. First off, establishing a sustainable routine is key. You can't just wing it when it comes to survival. Routines help keep things running smoothly and give people a sense of stability, which is vital in prolonged crises. In an urban setting, this might mean setting regular times for group meals, inventory checks, or security shifts. In rural areas, it might involve a routine for food cultivation, water collection, or checking perimeter defenses. The more routine you can build into your day-to-day, the more mental energy you save for unexpected challenges. Another best practice is focusing on renewable resources. Look, no matter how much you've stockpiled, supplies eventually run out. So it's important to start thinking about what you can grow, create, or recycle within your own community. In an urban setting, this might mean container gardening or vertical gardens to make the most of limited space. In a suburban area, you might have more room for things like rainwater collection or community gardening. The idea is to shift from simply consuming resources to cultivating and replenishing them. Skills like canning, fermenting, and even basic medicine making can help stretch out what you have. Building a strong, cooperative culture is just as important. A group's ability to stick together is often more about the relationships between people than the resources they share. Regular meetings, open discussions, and even small social events can go a long way in fostering trust and cooperation. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that in tough times, people need to feel like they're contributing and like they're valued. When you build that culture, people are more likely to support each other through the hard times and put the group's needs ahead of their own. So, what happens if things go south? Planning for a resource-sharing failure is an uncomfortable topic, but it's absolutely necessary. You always want to have contingency plans in place in case the group has to split up, or if resources become so scarce that people need to go their own way. It might be as simple as keeping a personal reserve of supplies separate from what's in the communal stash, or maybe it means having an exit plan if the group dynamics start to break down. Personal reserves are a touchy subject in a sharing community, but having that backup can be the difference between survival and desperation. If someone decides to leave the group, or if the group has to divide resources, you'll want a system in place to do it fairly. This isn't just about being nice, it's about avoiding resentment and keeping things smooth if people need to move on. Let's say someone has to leave because they've found a safer place to go, or maybe a group member just isn't fitting in well. If you've set up clear agreements from the beginning, you can avoid a messy split by sticking to the guidelines everyone agreed on. Dividing resources based on individual contributions or needs can keep things fair and, most importantly, keep people from feeling bitter or wronged. And then there's securing what's left after a group split. If the group's resources have been depleted, you don't want what's left to be vulnerable. That might mean moving supplies to a new location, changing security protocols, or even reevaluating who's responsible for what within a smaller group. The reality is that no survival situation is static, and groups evolve. Sometimes that evolution includes people leaving or joining, and your plans have to be flexible enough to accommodate that. So, as you can see, resource sharing in survival situations isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It's a strategy, a mindset, and honestly, a bit of a balancing act. Its success really hinges on understanding your environment, knowing the nature of the disaster you're facing, and being in tune with the social dynamics at play. Whether you're dealing with civil unrest in a big city or a prolonged grid-down situation in a rural area, the approach to sharing has to be strategic. You've got to be cautious. Think carefully about who you trust, and always keep your personal security and that of your family as a top priority. And here's a key takeaway. Guard your preparations and never fully disclose the extent of your resources or capabilities. Even if you're part of a sharing community, there's wisdom in holding a little back, not out of greed, but out of practicality. The truth is, through careful resource sharing, skill exchange, and smart planning, a community can be incredibly resilient. But at the end of the day, individual preparedness is still your best asset. So thanks for sticking with me through this breakdown of resource sharing. And if you found this helpful, go ahead and like the video, hit that subscribe button, and share this with anyone you think would benefit from knowing the ins and outs of long-term survival strategies. Let's keep building a resilient community right here on Reliable Prepper. Until next time, stay safe, stay prepared, and remember, when we're prepared, we're stronger together.